You don't have a discipline problem, you have an identity problem. Let that hit you before you make another excuse, before you download another productivity app, before you buy another journal, another course, another fantasy about the new you that starts on Monday. You don't lack willpower, you lack definition. And a man without definition is dust in the wind. Moved by impulse, bent by emotion, owned by environment. You say, I need more discipline. No, discipline is automatic when identity is solid. A lion doesn't need motivation to hunt. A shark doesn't need a podcast to swim. They move because that's what they are. Their behavior is an extension of their nature. But you wake up negotiating with yourself. Snooze or grind, gym or comfort, work or scroll, build or escape. That negotiation is proof you haven't decided who you are. Because when identity is clear, decisions are instant. You don't debate whether to brush your teeth. You don't debate whether to breathe. Why? Because it's embedded, it's non-negotiable, it's part of your self-image. But greatness, that's still optional in your mind. And that's the disease. The world doesn't reward effort. It rewards certainty. It rewards men who move with internal authority. Men who don't ask, should I, but declare, I do. Here's the brutal truth nobody wants to admit. Most of you are addicted to the fantasy of being disciplined without committing to the identity of a disciplined man. You love watching transformation videos. You love hearing about 5 a.m. routines. You love imagining the future version of yourself. But imagination without identity is entertainment. You consume inspiration like candy, sweet, temporary, meaningless. Then reality hits. Because reality doesn't care about your motivation spike. Reality measures consistency. And consistency is impossible when your identity is fragmented. You're trying to perform like a king while secretly identifying as a victim. You're trying to build wealth while identifying as bad with money. You're trying to get strong while identifying as not athletic. You're trying to command respect while identifying as socially awkward. You're split. And a split mind creates weak action. This is high-level psychological warfare, and the battlefield is your self-concept. Understand this clearly. Every action you take is a vote for the person you believe you are, not who you want to be, not who you post about, not who you tell your friends you're becoming, who you believe you are. If you skip the gym, it's not a disciplined failure. It's evidence. Evidence that deep down, you don't see yourself as an athlete. You see yourself as someone who tries. If you procrastinate, it's not laziness. It's alignment. Alignment with the identity of someone who operates under pressure, not purpose. If you quit when it gets hard, it's not weakness. It's congruence. Congruence with the identity of someone who escapes discomfort. You are always acting in alignment. The problem is what you're aligned with. Let me give you the analogy. Life is high-stakes chess, not checkers, not luck. Chess. Every move is strategic. Every move is revealing. Your identity is the king. Your habits are the pieces. You're obsessing over the pawns. Should I wake up earlier? Should I eat cleaner? Should I focus more? But your king is exposed. If the king is weak, it doesn't matter how perfectly you move the pieces. You will lose. When identity is fragile, habits collapse under pressure. When identity is monumental, habits become automatic. The elite don't rely on mood. They rely on identity. A soldier doesn't wake up and ask, do I feel like defending my country today? His duty is not emotional. It's structural. It's who he is. You, on the other hand, treat your goals like hobbies. Optional, flexible, dependent on comfort. And then you wonder why your results are insignificant. The world is not confused about you. It responds exactly to the signals you send. If you see yourself as average, you will unconsciously seek average outcomes. Average friends, average conversations, average risks. Your nervous system will reject anything that threatens your current identity. That's why when you start improving, it feels unnatural, uncomfortable, almost wrong. Because growth is identity death, and your brain fears death more than failure. Let me go deeper. There are two types of pain in this world: the pain of discipline, the pain of identity conflict. Most people choose the first temporarily, but avoid the second permanently. They'll force themselves to grind for a week. They'll push for a month. They'll white knuckle it. But they won't sit alone and confront the real question: who am I? Because if you admit you've been living as a smaller version of yourself, That's devastating. That means the ceiling you thought was imposed by circumstances was actually self-imposed. That's terrifying. So instead, you blame discipline. It's safer. I just need more focus. I just need better habits. No, you need a new self-image. You need to become the kind of man for whom discipline is default. And that requires something far more brutal than a to-do list. It requires internal conquest. You must declare war on the identity that keeps you small. Right now, your subconscious is running old code. Maybe you were told you're lazy. Maybe you were told you're not smart. Maybe you were told you're average. And you internalized it. Now you live it. You act it out daily, proving your past right. That's not destiny. That's programming. And programming can be overwritten, but only with repetition and authority. You don't change identity with affirmations whispered softly in the mirror. You change identity with decisive action, repeated until your nervous system has no choice but to accept the upgrade. You go to the gym even when it feels unnatural. You speak up even when your voice shakes. You take risks even when fear screams, not because you feel ready, but because you are installing a new identity through behavior. This is biological evolution in real time. In nature, adaptation is survival. Species that fail to adapt disappear. There's no sympathy in evolution, no participation trophies. The modern world is no different. If you don't evolve your identity, you become obsolete, insignificant, invisible, replaced. And here's the brutal layer beneath all of this. Your environment reinforces your current identity. Your friends expect you to be the same. Your family expects you to be predictable. Your routines are built around your limitations. The moment you try to rise, you will feel resistance, not because they hate you, but because your evolution threatens their comfort. If you become disciplined, they must confront their lack of it. If you become wealthy, they must confront their excuses. If you become strong, they must confront their excuses. If you become strong, they must confront their softness. So they subtly pull you back. Relax. Don't take it so seriously. You've changed. Yes, that's the point. Identity transformation is isolating, but isolating is the price of elevation. You can't ascend while clinging to a version of yourself that no longer serves your mission. And let's be clear, this is not about becoming robotic. It's about becoming congruent. When your thoughts, actions, and self-perception align, energy explodes. No friction, no debate, no hesitation, just movement, monumental movement. You stop chasing discipline and start embodying it. You stop trying to be confident and start acting from certainty. You stop hoping for respect and start commanding it through presence. Because identity radiates. People feel it. When a man knows who he is, the room adjusts. He doesn't need to announce his goals. His posture speaks. His tone speaks. His standards speak. But when a man is unsure, the room senses that too. And reality mirrors uncertainty with chaos. So here's your internal command. Stop asking, how can I be more disciplined? Start asking, how can I be more disciplined? Start asking, who must I become for discipline to be inevitable? That question changes everything. Because now you're not tweaking habits, you're rewriting character. You're not chasing motivation, you're forging identity, and forging is violent. Steel is shaped under heat and pressure, not comfort, not convenience. If your life feels chaotic, unfocused, inconsistent, good, that's the signal. That's the friction between who you are and who you could be. Most men numb that friction, they distract. They stroll, they indulge, they shrink back into familiarity. But the elite lean into it. They feel the discomfort and interpret it as growth. They understand that identity expansion feels like internal demolition. Old beliefs cracking, old excuses collapsing, old limits dissolving. And it's loud. It's uncomfortable. It's lonely. But it's necessary. Because the version of you that built your current life cannot build your next one. Read that again in your mind. The man who created your current reality, your income, your body, your relationships, is not qualified to create the next level. He's capped, unless he evolves. And evolution is not cosmetic, it's structural. You must decide with absolute clarity who you are from this moment forward. Not who you were, not who you're trying to be. Who you are. Are you the type of man who trains daily? then you train regardless of mood. Are you the type of man who builds wealth relentlessly? Then you execute regardless of comfort. Are you the type of man who speaks with authority? Then you speak regardless of fear. No more identity ambiguity. Ambiguity creates hesitation. Hesitation creates weakness. Weakness invites chaos. You want control? Control your identity. Because once identity is locked, discipline becomes background noise. Automatic, unquestioned. And when that happens, the world starts to bend. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped negotiating with yourself and started living in alignment with a higher internal standard. And once that standard is set, once that identity is declared and reinforced through ruthless action, something shifts at a neurological level. Your brain stops asking for permission. It starts executing by default. And that is when you become dangerous, not to others, but to mediocrity. And when mediocrity realizes it can no longer live inside you, mediocrity starts to suffocate. It panics. Because it survives on hesitation. It feeds on your internal debates. It grows stronger every time you say tomorrow, every time you soften the standard, every time you tolerate less than your potential. But once your identity shifts, mediocrity has no oxygen. You don't try harder. You operate differently. Understand this. Discipline is a symptom. Identity is the cause. You've been treating symptoms your entire life. You download productivity systems. You watch morning routine videos. You set alarms. But your self-concept remains untouched. That's like repainting a collapsing building. Looks decent from the outside, rotten at the core. If you identify as someone who lacks follow-through, your brain will sabotage long-term effort. It will whisper rationalizations that feel intelligent. You deserve a break. You've done enough. This isn't urgent. And you'll believe it, because identity protects itself. The human mind is obsessed with consistency, not success. It would rather be consistently average than inconsistently great. Let that sink in. If your identity is, I'm not that disciplined, then massive discipline feels threatening. It feels like betrayal of self. So your subconscious pulls you back to safety. Safety is small. Safety is predictable. Safety is insignificant. But growth requires psychological instability. You must be willing to feel unfamiliar inside your own skin. That's why most people never transform. They want new results without new self-perception. They want elite outcomes with amateur identity. Doesn't work? Imagine a man who truly sees himself as elite, not arrogant, not delusional, but internally certain. Do you think he negotiates with snooze buttons? Do you think he argues with himself about standards? No, because for him, discipline is an effort. It's alignment. When you are aligned, energy flows. When you are fragmented, energy leaks. Right now, your energy leaks through doubt, through comparison, through insecurity, through internal arguments. You're exhausted, not because you work too hard, but because you think too weakly. You wake up and your mind immediately starts negotiating your value. Am I good enough? Can I really do this? What if I fail? That internal dialogue is identity insecurity. And insecurity kills execution. High performers are not fearless. They are defined, they know who they are, and when identity is defined, fear becomes irrelevant noise. Let's use war as the analogy. In war, confusion kills faster than bullets. If soldiers don't know their mission, don't know their role, don't trust their position, chaos erupts. But when roles are clear, when mission is defined, movement becomes decisive. You are currently a soldier without a mission. You have goals, yes, but goals are external. Identity is internal command. When identity becomes command, your actions become orders, not suggestions. You don't suggest to yourself to go to the gym. You don't suggest to yourself to build. You don't suggest to yourself to study. You order it, and you obey. The reason you don't obey yourself is because you don't respect yourself. And you don't respect yourself because your identity is inconsistent. You break promises to yourself daily, and every broken promise weakens authority. If a general gives orders and never follows through, soldiers stop listening. Your subconscious is the same. Every time you say, I'll wake up early, and don't you lower your rank internally, eventually your own mind stops taking you seriously. Then you call it lack of discipline. No, it's lack of internal authority. Authority comes from congruence. When what you say matches what you do, power builds. Slowly at first, then exponentially. And once that authority solidifies, Discipline becomes unnecessary as a concept. You simply move. But here's where it gets deeper. Identity is not just about actions. It's about standards. What do you tolerate? Because what you tolerate defines you more than what you aspire to. If you tolerate a weak body, you identify as someone who accepts weakness. If you tolerate low income, you identify as someone comfortable with limitation. If you tolerate disrespect, you identify as someone who allows it. Standards are identity in visible form. Raise standards, identity shifts. Lower standards, identity shifts. Lower standards, identity decays. Most men live with flexible standards. Flexible standards create flexible character. Flexible character creates unstable results. You must become rigid internally. Not rigid, emotionally rigid. In principle, decide the type of man you are, then remove alternatives. This is where most people fail. They keep options open. I'll try. I'll see how it goes. If it works, no, burn the boats. If you decide you are disciplined, there is no version of reality where you skip the work. If you decide you are elite, there is no scenario where you accept mediocrity. When identity becomes absolute, behavior becomes inevitable. And inevitability is power. Let's go even deeper psychologically. Your brain filters reality based on identity. If you believe you are unlucky, you will notice evidence of bad luck everywhere. If you believe you are capable, you will notice opportunities others ignore. Identity shapes perception. Perception shapes action, shapes results. So when you change identity, you literally change the world you see. Opportunities appear where excuses once lived. Challenges become arenas instead of threats. Pressure becomes fuel instead of paralysis. But this shift requires emotional detachment from your old self. You must be willing to let the old version of you die. An ego resists that because the ego clings to familiarity, even if familiarity is failure. You've grown attached to your struggles, attached to your story, attached to the identity of the guy who almost started, almost succeeded, almost transformed. That identity feels safe because it avoids final judgment. If you never fully commit, you never fully fail. But you also never fully win. Commitment is terrifying because it removes excuses. When you say, "This is who I am now," there is no fallback. And that's exactly why it works. You think discipline is about effort. It's about elimination. Eliminating the identity that negotiates. Eliminating the voice that rationalizes weakness. Eliminating the possibility of retreat. When retreat is impossible, progress is mandatory. That's conquest, not over others, over self. And self-conquest is the highest form of power. Because once you conquer yourself, external obstacles shrink. You don't panic under pressure. You don't crumble under criticism. You don't fold under difficulty. Because your identity isn't dependent on outcomes. It's rooted in standards. Outcomes fluctuate, identity anchors. This is why some men lose everything and rebuild stronger. Because their identity was never tied to possessions, it was tied to who they are. If your identity is "I am a builder," you build even from zero. If your identity is "I am disciplined," you execute even in chaos. If your identity is "I am elite," you operate even when unseen. No applause required, no validation needed. Because identity is internal sovereignty. You stop needing external proof. And when you stop needing proof, you start producing results. Silently, relentlessly, inevitably. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Until you redefine yourself, nothing changes permanently. You can push for weeks, you can grind for months, but without identity shift, you will revert. Reversion is natural when identity remains unchanged. Transformation is permanent only when identity upgrades. So the real question isn't, how do I become more disciplined? The real question is, who are you willing to become? Are you willing to become the man who intimidates his former self? Are you willing to become unrecognizable to the person you were a year ago? Are you willing to lose comfort, approval, and familiarity in exchange for alignment? Because that's the exchange. Identity transformation costs you your old life. It costs you your old excuses, your old patterns, your old circle, your old limitations. But what you gain is internal command. And once you taste internal command, once you experience what it feels like to act without hesitation, to move without negotiation, to execute without emotional drama, you realize something profound. Discipline was never the mountain, it was the shadow. The real mountain was identity, all along. And the moment you accept that, the moment you stop fixing habits and start forging self, everything changes. Not slowly, structurally. And when your structure changes, your destiny follows. And here's where it all crystallizes. You were never weak. You were undefined. You were never lazy. You were undecided. You kept asking for more discipline when what you needed was a declaration, a line in the sand, a moment where you stop negotiating with the old version of yourself and say, that man is finished. Because identity is chosen, not assigned, not inherited, not negotiated. Chosen right now, not tomorrow morning, not next month, not when circumstances improve. Now, you decide whether you are the kind of man who executes or the kind of man who explains. You decide whether you are built for conquest or built for comfort. You decide whether your name will represent power, precision, and standards, or hesitation, potential, and excuses. This isn't motivational fluff. This is structural reality. The moment you decide who you are and back that decision with ruthless, repetitive action, discipline stops being a struggle. It becomes a reflex. No drama, no emotion, no debate, just execution. Because a man with a defined identity doesn't rise to his goals. He falls to his standards. And if your standards are monumental, your life becomes monumental. So stop chasing discipline. Forge identity. Define it. Declare it. Defend it. And from that point forward, every action is no longer a test of willpower. It's simply proof of who you've decided to be.